Bob had a dream, not a regular dream mind you, this was a Hill-Jack Bob kind of dream. He wanted to be a jockey. Now Bob was built more like a lumberjack than a featherweight rider. He could eat a whole pecan pie in one sitting. But when Bob got an idea in his head, well, there was no stopping him. "I'm gonna win that there Kentucky Derby," Bob declared to his hound dog Carl. Carl just sighed and went back to sleep. He'd heard it all before. But Bob was serious this time. He ordered himself some of those fancy jockey outfits, silk and all. Of course they didn't quite fit right, more like sausage casings than clothes. Bob figured he needed a horse. Went down to the local farm and picked out the biggest, meanest looking rooster he could find. Figured it was close enough, named him Thunderbolt. Yep, Hill-Jack Bob was ready to take the racing world by storm. His mama just shook her head and smiled. "That boy ain't right," she chuckled. But she knew better than to try and stop him. When Hill-Jack Bob got an idea, it was like trying to herd cats. Pointless and liable to get you scratched. Now training for the Derby, well, that was a sight to behold. Bob figured he needed to get in shape, so he did what any sensible person would do. He ate more grits. Figured it would give him power. For speed, he chased squirrels. Lots of squirrels. He tried to teach Thunderbolt to run in circles. Thunderbolt, however, was more interested in pecking at shiny objects and napping in the sun. Bob even tried to make him a little saddle, out of a bottle cap and some duct tape. Thunderbolt wasn't impressed. One time, Bob convinced his uncle brother Joe to race him. Joe was riding his mama's prize pig, Petunia. They lined up, Bob hollering about the Kentucky Derby and Joe just grinning. The race lasted about 10 seconds. Petunia took off like a shot with Joe holding on for dear life. Bob and Thunderbolt, well, let's just say, roosters ain't built for speed. By the end of the day, Bob was tuckered out. He had dirt on his face, straw in his hair, and a rooster feather sticking out of his ear, but he was grinning. He was one step closer to that Kentucky Derby. Word got around about Bob's Derby dream. Folks thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. Real jockeys would show up at the general store, just to catch a glimpse of this Hill-Jack trying to ride that rooster. They'd laugh till they cried. Bob didn't mind. He figured they were just jealous of his natural talent. He even tried to get some pointers from him. Of course, it's hard to take advice from a fella who's tinier than your left leg. One time, Bob snuck into the local racetrack. Wanted to get a feel for the real deal. He snuck into the stables and came face to face with a giant racehorse. That horse took one look at Bob, in his too tight silks and rooster feather adorned hat, and let out a whinny that shook the whole barn. Bob just tipped his hat and said, "Howdy, ma'am. You wouldn't happen to know where I could find me a good squirrel, would you?" Needless to say, Bob's encounters with the professional racing world were eventful. He left a trail of laughter and bewildered animals wherever he went. He was like a hurricane in a jockey outfit, and nobody could look away. Bob's Derby wisdom nuggets of nonsense from the would-be champ. Now Bob might not have known much about actual horse racing, but that didn't stop him from sharing his wisdom with anyone who'd listen. The key to winning the Derby, Bob would say, is all in the hat. He figured a fancier hat made the horse run faster. He even glued a little plastic horse to his own hat just for good luck. Another time he swore the secret was feeding the horse nothing but chili. Gives them that extra fire in their belly, he'd explain, completely serious. His advice was mostly nonsense, of course. But folks couldn't help but laugh. He had a way of making even the silliest things sound downright profound. He was a walking, talking reminder that sometimes life was just about having a good time, even if you looked ridiculous doing it. And Bob, well, he was having the time of his life. Even if he never sat on a real racehorse, he was living his dream, and that's what mattered. Derby day arrives, Bob's ready to ride. Or is he? Derby day arrived. The sun was shining, the horses were raring to go, and Bob, well, Bob was nowhere to be found. Folks figured he'd finally come to his senses, that maybe riding a rooster in the Kentucky Derby wasn't the best idea. But then, just as the announcer was calling the horses to the starting gate, a commotion broke out near the track. There, standing tall and proud, was Hill-Jack Bob. He was wearing his shiniest silks, his hat with the plastic horse glued on top, and a grin that could stretch from Louisville to Lexington. And in his arms, well, it wasn't a rooster, it was a goat. A little ornery-looking goat wearing a saddle made out of a feed bag and some twine. "This here's Hurricane," Bob announced to the stunned crowd, "and we're gonna win this thing." The crowd roared with laughter. The real jockeys shook their heads in disbelief, but nobody could deny it. Hill-Jack Bob was something else. He was a force of nature, a one-man comedy show, and he was about to make the Kentucky Derby a whole lot more interesting.